With quick runs the order of the day, Captain Mark Curry set about the task in the best possible way. Curry was devastating, his driving magnificent, and capped that off with a brilliant pull shot to bring up his 50. Curry continued to plunder the pace attack, and the Blues had to make a change. Gavin Robertson was introduced to the attack from the northern end, and soon after, Curry's innings came to a close, 61, including 10 fours. 2 balls later, Paul Ross was also on the way back to the pavilion. Greg Arms took things into his own hands and belted the Blues' attack to all parts of the ground, including one towering 6 which landed way back of the grandstand. And to make matters worse for New South Wales, Mark Patterson copping one just under the nose, which required stitches. Robert Merlo brought up Newcastle's 400, and Arms continued to dominate the bowling with superb cut shots and also cover drives that rattled the pickets. But on 94, a change of mind. Murray Christie was the last Newcastle wicket to fall, and they declared the innings closed at 8 for 441. The New South Wales second 11 began well. Wayne Seabrook a glorious shot off his toes for 4, but debutant Chad White struck a telling blow. From there on, Michael Slater settled into a nice pattern and, ably supported by skipper Martin Hayward, had the Blues rebounding in the best possible way from their hammering in the field. 2 days remain, and on the magnificent Carl Oval pitch, there will be many more runs made. $16 to 1, 4 to 1 in favourite Ali Boy, and 9 to 1. At Canterbury, the fourth was the AMP Eastwood Sales Unit handicap over 1,250 metres. $12 to 1, 16 to 1 and 400 to 1. The unplaced favourite at 7 to 4, La Luca.
From the tragedy of last year's Strathfield massacre, in which 7 people were shot dead, a victims' help group called Vocal hoped lessons would be learnt about the control of firearms.
We expected that the gun laws, the new gun laws that were introduced, would be held up and maybe even tighter in some areas.
In March, tighter gun laws did come into effect, but according to Vocal, they're not tight enough to stop multiple shootings, like the one that happened on the Central Coast overnight. Now, Dawn Gilbert says the state government should go one step further and make it illegal to have an active gun in a home.
Well, I think the bolts or some part of the gun should be locked away, either in police stations or some domain, especially for that reason.
Despite the calls for tougher gun laws, the Sporting Shooters Association believes the government is unlikely to react in that way because so much time and money have already been invested in reviewing the firearms legislation. The association has proposed that a confidential government register of people treated for mental illness be set up and those listed be ineligible for a gun licence.
There have been, in a large number of cases, a previous history of mental illness, and at the moment there still isn't, in my view, an effective circuit breaker in place for people who become mentally ill who have licences of any kind.
The recently formed Shooters Political Party says the Central Coast incident is proof that tougher gun legislation doesn't stop violence, but merely punishes the hundreds of thousands of law-abiding citizens who happen to own a gun. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Most babies forced to start their lives in neonatal units, or those that die soon after birth, are victims of what amounts to starvation. If their mother's placenta isn't working properly, the baby's food supply and oxygen is cut off.
Although it's only some 2% of pregnancies, these babies in fact form the bulk of the babies admitted to the neonatal intensive care units. They form the bulk of the babies who die in utero or die soon after delivery. And they also are probably the majority of the babies who develop problems like cerebral palsy or long-term disabilities.
Ongoing placenta research at the John Hunter Hospital is aiming to improve the outlook for these babies. Laboratory tests have revealed the drug anginine, used to dilate blood vessels in hearts, would do the same for placentas. Based on those findings, John Hunter researchers launched the first pilot study to test the drug on pregnant women.
We repeated, I guess, some observations that have been made in the laboratory in placentas, that if you have a placenta sitting in a dish and you give the placenta anginine, the blood supply to the placenta improves. In these 5 women who had a small dose of anginine, we noted that the blood supply through the placenta, by using ultrasound to study the blood supply, appeared to improve.
Dr Giles says the research is in its very early stages and hopes to continue, money permitting, next year.
It may look like just rubble, but this is history uncovered. Archaeologist Peter Fenwick is measuring out more than the foundations of what's believed to have been a sergeant's quarters. He's drawing a link to a harsher age in Newcastle, when hundreds of the convicts sent here were ruled by the lash, often at the order of the man who lived in this small 5-metre wide room.
His particular job, and that's the reason for the dating, was that the permanent headquarters, originally a hospital building, then a prison, convicts were transferred to this site and used as a stockade from approximately that date, which meant that they needed some person of authority to supervise the work done by the convicts.
Excavations of the adjoining convict stockade site have already been carried out, but the fruits of this latest dig will hopefully reveal more about an officer's life in the penal colony.
On a national basis, it's very important. The site was reputed to be the first industrial site in Australia as the early 1816s. Now this is a building, certainly a little later, but on the same site.
While Peter Fenwick has been commissioned by the federal government to dig into and protect the past, the future of the site is still uncertain. It was going to be a car park, but now the Australian Heritage Commission has been called in to assess the value of a site that was home to convict blood, sweat and tears since early last century. Scott Bevan, NBN News. Kristen Armstrong turned 10 yesterday, but it was hardly a happy birthday because of what her dad Jeff had to come home and tell the family after 21 years of working at New Vale Colliery.
I always remember the good news that I got yesterday of the closure of the mine on my daughter's 10th birthday, and that was very sad.
It becomes a bit of a blow to be struck down like that after all your loyalty for so many years.
Jeff and his brother Robert are just two of the 114 miners to be sacked once New Vale closes in January. At nearby Awabba State Mine, the workforce will be slashed from 143 to 60. The cuts have come with Pacific Power's decision to abandon privatisation plans for all but the Munmora mine and instead keep the operations in state hands. The Miners' Union has called for an ICAC inquiry into the planned sale of Munmora, while the opposition says the attempted sell-off of the state pits had been a colossal waste of taxpayers' money. According to the opposition's mine spokesman, Pat Rogan, the government has spent about $2 million in its now aborted attempt to sell off the 8 mines. Businesses near the mine are concerned what will happen to them once New Vale closes.
We do rely on the local people to support you because we have no passing trade through here.
Money and where it will come from in the future is also on the Armstrong family's minds, as the chances of finding another job seem slim.
I'm 45. No, they don't want a 45-year-old man anywhere.
Scott Bevan, NBN News.
When he said, "Let there be light," I'm not sure this is what he had in mind.
Church is made to be enjoyed.
A far cry from fire and brimstone. They flock to the Workers' Club for what the Newcastle City Church is happy to call Church for the Unchurched. Mass en masse, according to Pastor Mark Smallcombe.
A lot of people won't walk into a church to hear the good news, so we're going to take it like Jesus did, out into the streets, out into the meeting places, even the club.
You're in a safe place amongst some hopefully sensible and sane people.
Some of the older members of the audience didn't seem convinced. The congregation was treated to a cabaret, the good news buried beneath some devilish decibels. Spreading the word in the workers will become a regular event. Meanwhile, in Hamilton, Newcastle's Greek community celebrated its National Day. The key word was orchi, the Greek word for no. They were commemorating the day in 1940 when Greece denied access to Italy, so Italian troops could not reach Allied forces in Egypt. Italy retaliated, but Greece held the Italian forces at bay until 1941, when it finally fell to a united German-Italian surge. More than 50 years later, in the Greek Orthodox Church, Newcastle members laid wreaths in memory of that dark time. Anthony Griffiths, NBN News. It was a good day for ducks, but even they didn't turn up. The reception committee sheltered beneath Stockton Bridge, eyes glued to binoculars, waiting for several species of waders to descend from the heavens, birds that every year come all the way from Siberia and China to roost in the Newcastle mudflats. They set up decoys, they rigged up a huge net, a trap triggered by gunpowder.
A cartridge fires inside, the exploding powder pushes these out.
That shoots off over
Shoots
there.
out right across there, taking the net with it. Spending a lot of time banding the birds, putting coloured tags on them, so that we can also identify where the birds go through from here on their way back to Siberia where they breed.
Wildlife organisations say these migratory birds are under threat as development slowly encroaches on their habitats. That's partly the reason for the tagging, to find out where the birds stop off on their round-the-world trip. This particular study group will have to have another tagging attempt tomorrow. Anthony Griffiths, NBN News.
The answers were in black and white today, but there was no need for 12-year-old Patrick Byrne to check them. He knew them all. Well, almost. Patrick answered 34 out of 35 questions correctly to win the major award. A Year 6 student, Patrick topped the class to give his school, New Lambton Primary, its 5th winner in the 12-year history of the competition. And although maths may not be the favourite for everyone, Patrick has a good reason why he likes it.
Well, because I'm just good at it and it's fun, kind of, sometimes.
But he wasn't the only one sporting a prize. Paul Faulkner, Helena Martin, Andrew Rigby, Clancy Wilson, Stephen Lamb and Michaela Freeston also collected awards. More than 12,000 students from a record 224 Hunter schools took part in the competition, again sponsored by the Newcastle Permanent Building Society.
The street mile was held on an out and back course at Swanston Walk in the city centre before a crowd of 5,000 shoppers. The 27-year-old Crichton, the World Student Games cross-country champion, took the lead at the halfway turn. But the 22-year-old Davey passed him with 50 metres to go to win in 3 minutes 59.3 seconds, with Crichton second in 3:59.8. Third was another young Victorian, Nigel Adkin, in a time of 4 minutes 0.1 seconds.
It's a light-hearted look at a very serious issue. A cartoon calendar produced to raise money for the Hunters Westpac Rescue helicopter service. Originally it was supposed to be a small promotional piece of artwork, but Newcastle Herald cartoonist Peter Lewis couldn't pass up a golden opportunity.
But it sort of grew, and there's such an enthusiastic bunch out at the rescue base that it rubs off on you, and the job just eventually amplified into a full calendar with 12 full black and white cartoons right through for each month.
Using the rescue staff as characters, the calendar is a tribute to the faces behind the service.
When you see a bunch of people who are so keen and so dedicated, you know, you just sort of feel committed to doing something good for them.
It received a good reception at the official launch at the Newcastle Workers Club today. The calendar costs $5 and will be on sale at the Chopper Base and all Westpac banks. Matthew White, NBN News.
The first fire was in this garbage bin at the rear of the Ampol service station. Fire officers had just put it out at about 2:30 this morning when they noticed another fire down the road. This time the Bayside Tavern was well alight. The blaze was brought under control, but the main bar area was extensively damaged. It's believed the fire also started in an industrial bin beside the building. The tavern was open this morning, cup celebrations held in the sidebar. Police are investigating, but according to the Deputy Regional Commander of the Fire Brigade, it's not the first time garbage bins have been targeted in the early hours of the morning.
We have been receiving numerous calls over the weekends around about the same time to industrial bins alight.
You could be excused for thinking Muswellbrook had changed its name to Melbourne for the day. It had everything, the colour and the excitement of that one day in November. Oh, and of course the betting. But for these racegoers, the famous race at Flemington was the furthest thing on their mind. You see, there was an extra reason to don the fancy hats and sip the bubbly today. The $1.8 million redevelopment of the racecourse at Skeletar Park was being officially opened. A new track and stalls giving Muswellbrook a flashy new racing and betting facility. While Racing Minister George Souris did the official honours, others did their pay packets. And then it was time for the locals' real race of the day, the Muswellbrook Cup.
Led the leader from Janami there, followed by Opmadur. Golden Dome down the outside. More Money is putting in its claimer. About 300 left to go. Fiddletown led, being tackled by Opmadur, and More Money on the outside. Kalira Kid is running on her. More Money has hit the front from Opmadur with 50 or 60 metres left to travel. It's More Money in front, and the top weight wins the cup. More Money beat Opmadur.
More Money first, Opmadur second, Kalraya Kid third. For the winners, the spoils. For the losers, well, there's always next year. Matthew White, NBN News.
The Meizu High, with 35 crew on board, is one ageing bulk carrier that until now has managed to slip an international safety net. Built in 1973, it's nearing the end of its safe working life, according to marine surveyors who found its structural frame riddled with rust during an inspection in Newcastle.
The vessel's strength would have been reduced, and likewise the ship would probably have to undergo reasonable extensive repairs to restore the strength and seaworthiness of the vessel.
More than 1,000 ships visit the port each year. Most are surveyed about every 6 months, complying with an international sea safety convention. But even so, last year, 6 ships went down, most with the loss of life before reaching their home ports. As solid as these ships seem, they're expected to flex while at sea. If there's a structural problem, they can crack up and go to the bottom. Just last week, a South Korean bulk carrier out of Western Australia hit a typhoon off Japan. It sank with all hands. The Meizu Hai is owned by the Chinese government. Owners' representatives and inspectors met today to discuss what repairs are necessary to make the ship seaworthy. It could be tied up for weeks. 2 years ago, a Vietnamese ship, the Tan Binh, with a cargo of aid supplies was detained. It defied regulations and made a run for it, eventually arriving safely at its home port.
Any ship that is deemed unseaworthy poses a threat no matter where it goes. So our job is to ensure that the ship is safe for its intended voyage and is seaworthy for that voyage.
Rates may be a headache to residents, but for councils, they are their bread and butter. At last night's meeting, Newcastle's aldermen went through the motions of what's become an annual ritual. They voted to increase rates by 2.6%, the ceiling limit set by the state government.
To keep up with what we're doing, the way we're doing it, we had to put the thing up at 2.6%. That's pretty near the CPI rise.
But independent alderman John Tate says the slug is too great during a recession and should have been pegged at 2%.
Surely, as leaders in the community and in charge of the public purse in local government, we should be demonstrating that we're prepared to exercise restraint that everybody else is being forced to.
I think Alderman Tate, as I pointed out last night, the last time he was running the budget, it was 26%, not 2.6%.
But Alderman Tate says the percentage figures don't tell the full story. It's been estimated that in dollar terms, 46% of ratepayers will be shelling out more than the agreed 2.6% hike. Rejected during the rate debate was a proposal to charge an extra $85 for garbage collection, with Alderman Dennis Nichols saying a separate fee would have hit hardest those least able to afford it. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Such a development is still a long way off, but would be in line with the Hunter Water Corporation's strategy to continue consumer-led rate fixing. According to Managing Director Paul Broad, customers have been better off with the user pay system introduced in 1982.
You get the bulk, your consumers pay less.
Now able to anticipate demands and revenue, the corporation can budget more accurately for its capital outlay and upkeep of services. Submissions were made to a government pricing tribunal which sets the rules of consumer protection for dealing with monopolistic service providers.
This is the report which it's hoped will make life a little easier for older Australians who can't speak English. In launching the report today, Ethnic Affairs Minister George Souris stressed how important it is that we consider the special needs and differences of our ethnic community.
It's a very practical document, and we hope that government departments, service providers and the ethnic communities themselves will embrace many of the suggestions to deliver a more direct and more caring aged care service for our ethnic ageing people.
By the year 2001, it's estimated the number of non-English speaking elderly people will reach 666,000. That is, 1 in 4 of all residents in aged accommodation will be from an ethnic background. Mr Torres praised the Tanoni Gardens multicultural village at Waratah, where some of the report's recommendations are already in practice. They include the opportunity for people of similar backgrounds to live together, the recruitment of staff with bilingual skills, and the provision of food specially prepared for various cultures.
Despite months of petitions and protests, Wallsend residents and the local high school's P&C committee couldn't dissuade the Department of Corrective Services from its plans to turn a public works depot into a periodic detention centre. But now the doors appear to have been shut on the proposal by Newcastle City Council. Last night, the council voted unanimously to reject the development application for the centre, a decision praised by the P&C.
They've accepted our arguments. They agreed it wasn't an emotional issue. It was done on facts, and we're very pleased.
With the high school just across the road from the site, the P&C had stepped up its opposition when it discovered that sex offenders could be among the detainees.
We were assured in the first place that detainees were only in there for minor non-violent offences, and when we got the figures, that certainly wasn't the case.
Before last night's meeting, the Department of Corrective Services assured the residents it would abide by whatever decision the council made. Today, a spokesman for Justice Minister Wayne Merton says that statement still stands and the department will now look at other as yet unstated options for the centre. But at least one alderman is looking for more reassurance.
I would expect that the community would be looking for him to endorse what he said, and I'd like to see them do that quickly, because the longer that is left unfinished, the more concern it will just be there until it is resolved that way.
Scott Bevan, NBN News.
The bill argues that dingoes should be allowed to be kept and bred by private owners like any other dog. Democrat Richard Jones says the purebred dingo is much safer than, say, a German Shepherd or pig dog. But the Rural Land Protection Board says the idea is madness.
What they're going to be doing is breeding disaster for the urban and the rural community, who are already suffering enough as it is.
In the Singleton region, Bert Eade has seen scores of sheep and stock maimed and killed by the dogs. Government authorities estimate dingoes in New South Wales are responsible for stock losses valued in excess of $1 million. Add to that another $1 million in control programs and you have a very expensive problem. A statewide program is running to poison the dogs in the wild. Under existing law, dingoes can be kept only in reserves and zoos. Some desexed dogs are kept privately. The bill goes before Parliament next week. The Democrats arguing the dingo is a national treasure that should be preserved. Peter Ryan, NBN News.